Hello and welcome. You're watching the Saturday edition of This Is Exclusive. Ladies and gentlemen, we are just inching closer to the marquee summit of the G20 in the national capital in the next few days. Over the last couple of months, we've seen over 200 meetings actually taking place in 55 cities, a little more than that, and several heads of state actually arriving in the national capital in the next couple of days. But what does the G20 really mean for India? As some are essentially indicating, could this be a hype, or does this really have a value for the ordinary people? Ladies and gentlemen, the value of a G20 is something that perhaps the country is now going to realize in the days to come. And what is it that India is trying to achieve with the G20 summit? As the Prime Minister essentially puts it, that there is a lot more that India is going to achieve, and this is not just about India, but for the global world order. All that and much more in this edition of This Is Exclusive, which we are completely dedicating on the G20 summit. We'll take you through what has been achieved in the last couple of months and what are we to expect in the coming few days. But up first, these are the headlines we're tracking at this hour.
आप सबको सैल्यूट करना चाहता था.
Prime Minister salutes the spirit of our ISRO scientists as he visits ISTRAC earlier this morning.
स्थान पर चंद्रयान 3 का मून लैंडर उतरा है. अब उस पॉइंट को शिव शक्ति के नाम से जाना जाएगा.
Prime Minister announces Chandrayaan 3 landing site to be called Shiva Shakti, Chandrayaan 2 site to be called Tiranga. ISRO releases new video of rover Pragyan in pursuit of lunar South Pole secrets.
G20 समिट शानदार हो, रंग राग से भरा हुआ हो. ये काम दिल्ली के मेरे नागरिक भाई बहन करके दिखाएंगे, ये मेरा पूरा विश्वास है.
New Delhi gears up to host world leaders on 9th and 10th of September for the big G20 summit. Ten pilgrims bound to Rameshwaram from Uttar Pradesh killed in cylinder blaze in a train in Madurai. Ladies and gentlemen, the annual G20 summit is fast approaching, and representatives from member countries will be in New Delhi in the last 2 weeks. Now, the purpose of the yearly summit is for the world leaders to discuss global concerns like the environment, trade, and economy. This year's summit will also be the first in India, and all eyes will be on Prime Minister Narendra Modi as the nation prepares to host the world's most powerful heads of state. So what can we really expect from the upcoming G20 meeting? What exactly is the agenda? Here's all that you need to know.
As India gears up to host the G20 summit in New Delhi, preparations are in full swing.
यहाँ पर फाउंटेन्स को लगाया गया है और ये कोणार्क का व्हील भी यहाँ पर लगाया गया है, जो हमारे देश की सभ्यता को बताता है. जो फाउंटेन्स लगाए गए हैं वो राजस्थान से लाए गए हैं, वो मार्बल के हैं, और जो कोणार्क व्हील लगा हुआ है ये उड़ीसा से लाया गया है. हमारे आर्टिजन्स को भी बहुत काम मिल रहा है इन कामों से, और साथ साथ दिल्ली को जो एक हमारा सपना है कि हम उसे बिल्कुल क्लीन ग्रीन बनाएं, उसको भी पूरा करने का काम कर रहे हैं.
The annual G20 summit is fast approaching and representatives from member countries will be in New Delhi in less than 2 weeks. This year's summit will also be the first in India. All eyes will be on Prime Minister Narendra Modi as the nation prepares to host the world's most powerful heads of state.
G20 की मेजबानी पूरा देश मेजबान है, लेकिन ज्यादा से ज्यादा जिम्मेवारी मेरे दिल्ली के भाइयों बहनों की है, मेरे दिल्ली के नागरिकों की है। और इसलिए देश की साख पर रत्ती भर भी आंच न आए, ये हमारे दिल्ली को करके दिखाना है। देश की आन बान शान का झंडा ऊंचा करने का सौभाग्य मेरे दिल्ली के भाइयों बहनों के पास है।
The G20 summit will take place on September 9th and 10th. It will include numerous meetings between heads of states, invitees and various officials. The theme of this year's G20 presidency is Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, or One Earth, One Family, One Future.
This is a year in which the world is witnessing India's G20 presidency. Our approach of One Earth, One Family, One Future is resonating across the globe. This human-centric approach that we present and that we represent has been welcomed universally.
The summit will focus on sustainability and environmental preservation. India's goal has been to emphasize the value of all human, animal and plant life. The primary objective of the G20 Summit 2023 is to enhance the country's GDP and pave the way for a robust economy.
India's theme is emerging from its civilizational saying Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, which is one earth, one family, one future. We may have different geographical boundaries, we may have different political ideologies, but we are all from the same cosmos. And therefore, our entire presidency is broadly driven under 3 themes of one earth, one family, and one future.
The White House meanwhile said that the socio-economic impact of the Russia-Ukraine war will figure in United States President Joe Biden's discussion with other G20 leaders in New Delhi. As India gears up to host the G20 summit in September, this is a moment for India to transition to being a rule maker. Bureau Report, Republic TV.
Well, in fact, ladies and gentlemen, over the last couple of months, as we mentioned, there were multiple meetings that took place across over 50 cities, looking at various verticals, starting from tourism to the very fact that climate change happens to be another big concern. And as the Prime Minister essentially spoke about what really happens if there is a future pandemic. Now, what is the latest meeting that took place? Now, the Prime Minister in a video message at the G20 Culture Ministers Meet spoke on India's heritage being a vital asset for economic growth and, in fact, diversification. Take a look at this special report.
As cultural ministers meet of G20 begins in Varanasi, these are glimpses of India's rich culture and heritage. Hear out Prime Minister's message at the G20 Culture Ministers Meet as he spoke on heritage being a vital asset for economic growth and diversification.
I am confident that your efforts will foster sustainable practice and lifestyles. Excellencies, we believe that heritage is a vital asset for economic growth and diversification.
From Union Minister Arjun Ram Meghwal to MOS Meenakshi Lekhi, the leaders elucidated on the focus of G20 culture ministers.
प्रधानमंत्री जी ने अपने संदेश में वाराणसी और भारत की जो इतनी विविधतापूर्ण और इतनी समृद्ध विरासत है उसके विषय में जिक्र किया और वन डिस्ट्रिक्ट वन प्रोडक्ट की भी बात करी।
काशी जो है वो इस देश की नहीं, मुझे लगता है बहुत से संसार के लोग भी इसको मानते हैं कि इज ए कल्चरल कैपिटल ऑफ द कंट्री, स्पिरिचुअल कैपिटल ऑफ द कंट्री। तो जब कल्चरल और स्पिरिचुअल कैपिटल है वाराणसी और यहाँ से जो एजेंडा निकलेगा वन अर्थ वन फैमिली वन फ्यूचर का, तो उसकी आवाज़ बहुत दूर तक जाएगी और भारत को वर्ल्ड लीडर बनाने में मदद मिलेगी, कामयाब होंगे हम।
With just days left for the G20 summit, the G20 cultural meet sets the tone for the mega build-up to the much-anticipated summit. Bureau Report, Republic TV.
Joining us on this special broadcast on G20 is Mr. Brahma Chilani. Mr. Chilani, thank you very much for joining us on this special broadcast on G20 on Republic TV. Let me straight away begin by asking you, the Prime Minister essentially set the tone, saying what exactly is the agenda of a G20, keeping in mind that when it comes to the geopolitical tensions that one witnesses today, it shouldn't essentially lead to some sort of a humanitarian crisis, especially when it comes to, medical products or, for that matter, various other major issues. And keeping that in mind, perhaps the way forward is to bring everyone together, the consensus that has been spoken about. But as far as consensus is concerned, the last couple of meetings that have taken place, many would say that that appears to become one of the biggest challenge. Do you believe that in the days to come, in the culmination of this summit, a consensus document could become the biggest headache?
Well, first, let's keep in mind that the G20 is primarily an economic forum. Actually, it's the world's premier economic forum. But geopolitics increasingly has come into play, clouding G20 meetings. We saw that at the Bali summit last year, how the Ukraine war cast a long shadow over the G20 summit. Now, India has to play a balancing role given the new global divides. In fact, not just play a balancing role, India will have to be the bridge builder between the rival blocs that we see now. President Putin is not coming, but President Xi Jinping will be here. And we have the Western leaders, including Biden, Macron, we will have the Canadian, the British prime ministers, we'll have the entire Western bloc virtually present in New Delhi. And they will insist on some language on Ukraine. The question is the joint statement that important? What's more important is the content, the agenda for discussions, reaching agreement on core economic issues. That should be the primary focus of the G20 summit deliberations.
Mr. Brahma Chilani, I'll just request you to stay on, because the one other aspect that I perhaps want to focus is the expansion of G20 and how exactly is India perceived as the voice of a global South. I'll come to that in a short while from now, Mr. Chilani, as we just put together some aspects of what we are calling how India becomes the voice of a global South. Now, India, in fact, has hosted a special virtual summit that's called the Voice of Global South Summit under the theme Unity of Voice, Unity of Purpose from January 12th and 13th. And now it was a unique initiative that envisaged bringing together countries of the global South and in fact share their perspectives. their priorities on a common platform across a whole range of issues. Now, the initiative was essentially inspired by Prime Minister Narendra Modi's vision of Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, Sabka Vishwas or Sabka Prayas, and also underpinned India's philosophy of Vasudev Kutumbakam. Now, as far as India is concerned, which is largely emerging as a voice of Global South, and what significance it will essentially have on the G20 meet. Take a look at this special report.
India's G20 presidency is a watershed moment, with the country helping shape a number of global issues. Among them are the reform of multilateral development banks, the inclusion of the African Union, and the focus on climate action. As a central figure taking forward the G20 this year, Prime Minister Narendra Modi has successfully ensured that India plays a pivotal role in addressing the concerns of the Global South. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has emerged as its most prominent and powerful global brand ambassador. The shifting tides of global growth have brought to light a significant trend that 80% of the world's growth now originates from countries in the Global South, largely attributed to their favorable demographics. India's emphasis on the region during its G20 presidency has coincided with the second year of the ongoing Russia-Ukraine conflict. The war has served as a moment of truth. It has laid bare the differences in the perceptions between the global North and South, bringing to surface long-standing underlying tensions. And by vociferously amplifying the Global South's voice, India has not only spoken for itself, but on behalf of several countries representing a young, rapidly growing, assertive yet vulnerable region. PM Modi's push to include the African Union as a full member of the G20 is evident of this. The logic is conceptually sound. If the European Union, with its population of less than 450 million, can be a member of the G20, why can't the African Union, with its more than 1.3 billion population? Europe's relations with other countries in the Global South are at a turning point. But with India pushing and being a voice for Global South, India is becoming a testament to show itself as a confident, emerging power with the potential to shape global dynamics. Bureau Report, Republic TV.
Mr. Chilani, the purpose of highlighting what we just did a short while back about India being perceived as the voice of a Global South, many would say that perhaps in this G20 summit, if there is a game changer, or perhaps what would be taken forward is the very fact that we are also talking about the inclusion of the African Union, something that the Prime Minister has been very vocal about. We've seen what really happened in BRICS too. But do you believe for the longest time, this was an aspect which wasn't really focused on, and largely these groupings missed out those very countries which had a very important role to play?
Yes, you are right. If you look at the G20, it's largely dominated by the Western countries. So expanding it, including the countries from the Global South, making it more relevant to today's challenges, that's the imperative facing the G20. The European Union is a member of the G20. Why shouldn't the African Union also be a member of the G20? The good news is that the Indian proposal for African Union's inclusion has received the support of the Biden administration. So hopefully, African Union would be included in the G20 at the New Delhi summit. But we need to make the G20 more relevant to the global challenges. What we are seeing, unfortunately, is the decay or decline of global institutions. Even the G20 no longer is playing the role that it was supposed to play. It has not lived up to its promise And the big challenge, the biggest challenge is not so much expanding it, is to make the G20 more relevant to today's world. We have seen how BRICS was recently expanded at the Johannesburg summit. No objective criteria was agreed upon by the BRICS member states. Arbitrarily, 6 new member states are being invited to join from January 2024. Now, this expansion bears largely China's stamp. And the question that we need to ask ourselves, will this actually make BRICS more relevant or less relevant? In fact, the BRICS has struggled to shape a common identity and agenda with just 5 member states. Now that there will be 11 member states of BRICS, the task of forging a common identity and a common agenda becomes so much more difficult. So while G20 needs to include countries from the global south, we need to also ensure that the G20 seeks to address the major challenges that the world faces today.
Right. Thank you very much, Mr. Brahmachelani, for joining us on this special broadcast and putting this into perspective. You speak about the challenges. In fact, this is one focus that we have right now. How exactly would the conflict between Russia and Ukraine really pan out in this very summit? The Russia-Ukraine war undoubtedly will become one of the major focus points. It is known that President Putin will not be attending the G20 meet in Delhi next month, where he says that he's going to be busy with the Ukraine preparations, or rather a special military operation. He's going to skip that key meeting. Earlier, he had also skipped the multilateral meeting since the start of the Russian invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, and virtually participated in the BRICS summit in Johannesburg this week. So how exactly would a consensus be arrived on various issues? The United States of America has made it abundantly clear that Russia-Ukraine war will certainly figure in the meeting that is going to take place in the national capital. With Russia now skipping in this G20 summit, what does this essentially mean? Take a look at this special report.
Since the onset of the war in Ukraine, Russian President Vladimir Putin has not attended multilateral summits, barring the 2022 SCO summit in Uzbekistan, Collective Security Treaty Organization summit in Armenia, and the Conference on Interaction and Confidence Building Measures in Asia in Kazakhstan's Astana. All 3 organizations which are Russia-backed and in which Russia has a key role to play. Now it is known that Russian President Vladimir Putin will not attend the G20 summit in New Delhi next month to focus on the ongoing military operation in Ukraine. Over the past few weeks, Putin's participation in the G20 summit has been the subject of intense speculation in diplomatic circles in New Delhi. As recently as last month, people familiar with the matter had put the chances on Putin's participation as 50-50. A Russian advance team visited New Delhi earlier this month to assess preparations for the summit. However, the Russian officials have now confirmed news of Putin skipping the G20 summit. This is not the first summit that the Russian president will be skipping. He, in the past, also skipped the G20 summit in Nusa Dua, Bali, Indonesia last year. However, reports say that Putin skipped the Johannesburg event due to the arrest warrant placed on him by the International Criminal Court in March over the abduction of children from Ukraine.
President Vladimir Putin has decided to not attend the G20 summit in New Delhi next month, and this could be a reprieve to Indian diplomats because the tensions between the West and Russia because of the Ukraine war are at an all-time high. In fact, many of the G20 meetings in India have ended without a joint communique because Russia and China have not agreed for the mention of the word war in the joint statement. President Putin had also decided to skip the BRICS summit. He was not physically present at the BRICS summit that was held recently because of the ongoing war, and now he has decided to skip the next meeting as well. In fact, the shadow of the Ukraine war could outlast India's G20 presidency and could have long-term effect.
On being asked about whether there will be some kind of solution or some kind of agreement to stop the Russia-Ukraine war during the G20 summit in New Delhi, this is what Vedant Patel, US Principal Deputy Spokesperson, had to say.
We would welcome any country that, one, wants to take steps to support our Ukrainian partners, and two, we would welcome any country playing a role in continuing to convey to the Russian Federation that how important and dire it is that they leave Ukraine altogether.
However, by skipping key meets on Russia-Ukraine war, can Putin wash his hands off the accountability? Bureau Report, Republic TV.
Well, that's all that we could pack in this edition of This Is Exclusive. Over the next few days, ladies and gentlemen, we'll take you through all the latest updates related to the G20 summit.